Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much for joining today on our talk entitled Fatima as Fatima, the role model for us all. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Amina Inloes who will be speaking to us on this topic. But before we start the main talk, we'll start with the recitation of Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض، له الملك وله الحمد وهو على كل شيء قدير. هو الذي خلقكم فمنكم كافر ومنكم مؤمن والله بما تعملون بصير. خلق السماوات والأرض بالحق وصوركم فأحسن صوركم وإليه المصير. يعلم ما في السماوات والأرض ويعلم ما تسرون وما تعلنون والله عليم بذات الصدور. ألم يأتكم نبأ الذين كفروا من قبل فذاقوا وبال أمرهم ولهم عذاب أليم. ذلك بأنه كانت تأتيهم رسلهم بالبينات فقالوا أبشر يهدوننا فكفروا وتولوا واستغنى الله والله غني حميد. زعم الذين كفروا أن لن يبعثوا قل بلى وربي لتبعثن ثم لتنبؤن بما عملتم وذلك على الله يسير. فآمنوا بالله ورسوله والنور الذي أنزلنا والله بما تعملون خبير. يوم يجمعكم ليوم الجمع ذلك يوم التغابن. ومن يؤمن بالله ويعمل صالحا يكفر عنه سيئاته ويدخله جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا ذلك الفوز العظيم. والذين كفروا وكذبوا بآياتنا أولئك أصحاب النار خالدين فيها وبئس المصير. ما أصاب من مصيبة إلا بإذن الله ومن يؤمن بالله يهد قلبه والله بكل شيء عليم. وأطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول فإن توليتم فإنما على رسولنا البلاغ المبين. الله لا إله إلا هو وعلى الله فليتوكل المؤمنون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن من أزواجكم وأولادكم عدوا لكم فاحذروهم وإن تعفوا وتصفحوا وتغفروا فإن الله غفور رحيم. إنما أموالكم وأولادكم فتنة والله عنده أجر عظيم. فاتقوا الله ما استطعتم واسمعوا وأطيعوا وأنفقوا خيرا لأنفسكم ومن يوق شح نفسه فأولئك هم المفلحون. إن تقرضوا الله قرضا حسنا يضاعفه لكم ويغفر لكم والله شكور حليم عالم الغيب والشهادة العزيز الحكيم صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much for that beautiful recitation. Now we're very fortunate to have with us Dr. Amina Inloes, who will be speaking to us about about Fatima as Fatima. Will speak to us about Fatima as Fatima. Dr. Amina Inloes is well known to all of us. She's been involved and spoken at many of our sessions before. She's the author of Women in Shiism, Ancient Stories, Modern Ideologies, and a co-translator of Spiritual Mysteries and Ethical Secrets by Faith Kashani, as well as a contributor to the Tafsir al-Mizan translation project. She completed her PhD at the University of Exeter on the subject of Shi'i Hadith, and she teaches via distance education for the Islamic College in London, in the UK, a faith-based institution offering academic and seminary Hawza studies. Alongside her academic work, she's an occasional peripatetic and travels and lectures for Muslim communities worldwide, as well as engages in interfaith work. We're very fortunate to have her now, and we look forward to starting her talk.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be back with you in these difficult and sometimes rainy times. I hope, inshallah, everyone is blessed with health and financial security. And if not, may Allah ease your situation. Congratulations also on the birth of Hazrat Fatima, peace be upon her. Inshallah, the event can be a shining light in a bit of a gray and cloudy time. No offense to clouds. Today we are going to be looking at how Hazrat Fatima, peace be upon her, may or may not be a role model. That's right, I punctuated the title. I am going to get in trouble with this because the title was supposed to be Fatima is Fatima, the role model for us all. But as you can see from the beautiful slides that you are watching on your screens, that's a hint to turn on your screens if you're not watching, there is a ... question mark. Is she actually a role model for us all? I will be looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this. So please do collect your thoughts, and I'm sure you will have many valuable ones. So what do I mean by this question? One can put forward a couple questions about whether or not she can be a role model for all of us. One is that, according to Shi'i belief anyway, she is ma'soom. So she is infallible. Do I look infallible? Follow me around all day and see how infallible I am. Most of us are not quite at the level of infallibility. So therefore, is there a connection? Furthermore, when we look at some of the narrations about Hazrat Fatima in the realm of pre-creation or in the realm of the afterlife, or even some of the miracles during her own life, miraculous food, for example, coming to her, it's a bit like asking whether the Virgin Mary can be a role model for people. Yes? No? Maybe? So is she too lofty for that? Yes or no? Or does perfection give us something to aspire to? The other obvious question is, what if we are not in her life circumstances? For example, what if you're a guy? I guarantee you are not going to be birthing children. So her role model as a mother perhaps is not going to be something you're going to be living in a literal manner. Or perhaps you're at an older age. life changes as we go through different life phases. When you're 40 or 50, you're usually dealing with some different issues than you were when you were 12. And yet, she only walked the earth for a brief period of time. So, is she modeling things that we can all follow? Yes or no? I bet you have some thoughts right now, but we're going to save them until the end. So we are going to explore this question through looking at some of the different spheres of what is narrated about her. Starting with the very, very, very beginning. O Ahmed, or Muhammad, were it not for you, I would not have created the heavens. And were it not for Ali, I would not have created you. And were it not for Fatima, I would not have created either of you. So this is a very profound statement, letting us know that Hazrat Fatima as a person is not only celebrated as a companion of the Holy Prophet or blood relation of the Holy Prophet or early Muslim, but also as someone who has a profound link to the cosmology of creation and to the things that happen outside of the material plane as well. Or for example, you, Fatima, whom Allah tested before Allah created you and found that you would be patient over Allah's tests. That's part of what is appended to the ziyarat of Hazrat Fatima. So again, looking at things happening in the realm of pre-creation. So yes or no? I really do not wish to dominate the platform here. But I would point out that for those who are arguing yes, that certainly narrations do talk about the human being in the realm of pre-creation. So for example, if you accept this interpretation of the Quran, giving an oath of awareness, confession to Allah Ta'ala, and also that patience over Allah's tests is something we all have to deal with. Please bring me someone who has never had to be patient over one of Allah's tests. This is something that we indeed can copy. And this is suggesting that she is the best model of patience for us to copy. Even though, of course, when it comes to the specifics, there may be certain challenges that we face that she didn't personally face, especially in the arena of family problems. But nonetheless, she did go through many difficulties. So, a reminder about chronology, although I think you've been talking about her for a while now, so this is probably not exactly new news, but nonetheless, a repeat. There is a slight discrepancy in Sunni versus Shi'i sources about when she was born. Sunni sources tend to put it about 10 years earlier. Shi'i sources say about 612 to 615 AD, CE, whichever you prefer. Anyway, it is natural to have ambivalency about things that happened very early, you can say on the cusp of Islamic history, because there was really no reason for people to be recording them back then, and people didn't tend to record the births of children that much back in the day anyway. So it's not a big deal, in my view, that there is a bit of a discrepancy. But we do know that her early years spanned the formative developmental period of Islam. One can say that in many people's eyes during this time, Islam was on shaky ground. Not na'udhu billah that the concept of monotheism or revelation is on shaky ground, but just that Islam was not a world force. You know, you fast forward 400 years and the Muslims are at the pinnacle of a large, flourishing empire. There's theology, there's jurisprudence, there's science, there's philosophy, there's all these wonderful things happening in the Muslim world, despite even a lot of things that were not so great. But Islam had civilizational superiority then. In the early period of Islam, we know that it was just a handful of people, the Holy Prophet, Hazrat Khadija, Imam Ali, and then primarily the first Muslims tended to be slaves, the dispossessed, the poor, outsiders. So as with Jesus and Christianity, Islam spread first among those people who were not in the upper echelons of society, who did not necessarily want to to risk their material welfare, following this prophet who said they have to give zakat and homes and serve Allah and stop making money off of the idol worshipping trade. So in these early years, Hazrat Fatima was brought up, and we do know that she contributed very strongly towards defending the Holy Prophet, even as a young child. For example, you remember the account of when some of the big scary men of Quraysh threw some entrails on the Holy Prophet when he was praying. And she would have been quite young at that time. And keeping in mind that she's a child, so these are big scary men who know how to use swords and spears, and they have no problem hitting people and hitting women. And was she afraid? She stopped and think, should I do this or not? No, she did not. She just went and cleaned it up and faced them down. Or for example, during the Battle of Uhud, because this was a time of crisis, really, for the Muslim community. They had to defend themselves. It is related that she was nursing the Prophet's wounds and cauterizing them and stopping them with ashes. And these, again, are very practical ways that she was involved in some of the challenges of establishing the community. Now, I do think for those of us in areas where Islam is not it is either a minority religion or not very structurally established, there can oftentimes be a parallel. So, for example, in London, there's quite a lot of Muslims and Islamic institutions these days. But if you happen to be the only Muslim in your city, where there's 10 people who go to the mosque, or no one has ever heard of Islam, that's not so common nowadays, but certainly in my younger years before 9/11, there just tended to be a complete ignorance of Islam, that it might be some sort of exotic, weird Eastern thing. But if someone saw you wearing a hijab, they'd be, well, are you a nun? So that didn't click in a lot of people's minds. And so there is a sort of isolation and smallness of the community that is sometimes mimicked. And especially in areas where people are trying to spread Islam, so do da'wah, and to educate people about Islam and promote the growth of the community on a more structural level. And this can very much, in my view, mimic the circumstances that she was growing up in. So, okay, I'm actually biasing the discussion. I do feel that this is something many of us can model. And indeed, when in parts of the world where Islam is under attack, for example, we know what's been happening in China and the repression of Islam, and in some of the communist regimes, the repression of Islam. This is still a very live issue. It's not an issue that's gone away. The need to defend a community that might be vulnerable or weakened or a little bit more helpless. These were also very challenging times for her personally, as you know. On the one hand, it's interesting to see this parallel that we do agree that she had an ideal family life and that her father was an ideal father. Her mother, Hazrat Khadija, was an ideal mother, and you really can't get a better role model to be growing up with. Her husband, very good marital relationship, very good relationship with the children. And yet the structure and events, if you will, of the family were complicated in that her mother passed away when she was quite young. She had step parents, and that, of course, can be a challenge for some people. I'm not saying it was a challenge for her personally, but I'm saying the transition to a step family is not always easy. So there were challenges, if you will, that don't always even match our paradigm of what is a quote unquote idealized family. That is to say, a lot of times when we talk about family in Islam, we say, well, it's the biological father, the biological mother, and the biological children, and they're married their whole lives, and they're alive their whole lives, and etc. But of course, we know that on the ground, people tend to have more complicated family situations, with loss, with step family situations and step siblings and so forth. And so, and also adopted siblings as well, because Hazrat Khadija is said to have also looked after other children. So, and the Holy Prophet was looking after Imam Ali for that matter. So the point is, it is a complicated family structure, which nonetheless was also ideal in its own ways. And this is something that perhaps we might be able to use as a model as well. I hope you guys are getting what I'm saying there. I'm getting that. What I'm trying to say is that sometimes when we write books on family in Islam, for example, there's just a very simple view of what will happen, which may indeed be what happens in many lives. And yet when we look at either her life or really just people in the Arabian Peninsula back then, with all the people being, oft in battles and so forth, that there's a lot of, a lot more complexity sometimes in the family structure. But of course, she is oftentimes looked to as a role model in family matters as well. Dealing with grief and loss is a big challenge. And I definitely do not wish to advocate the view that one should simply just cut short the grieving process and say it's Allah's will. Because a lot of times, sometimes when people say that upon a loss, it is a genuine viewpoint that they have completely accepted the will of Allah, and that death is one of the things we can't change. It's done. Allah has taken the person. But on the other hand, sometimes people say it sort of to circumvent going through the grieving process. And you do generally need to go through the grieving process, which can take time and sometimes does involve anger and frustration and so on and so forth. Nonetheless, I am going to mention this narration that when Khadija passed away, Fatima was by her father's side and said, Ya Rasulullah, although he did ask her to call her my father, but nonetheless, she says this narration, where is my mother? So the Holy Prophet did not want to give her a direct answer. It's very difficult. And then it is related that the angel Jibreel came down and told the Prophet, your Lord commands you to tell Fatima that divine blessings are upon her and that Allah says, your mother is in a house of brocade with corners of gold and pillars of rubies between the homes of Asiya and Maryam. So Fatima said in reply, Allah is peace, as-salam, and peace is from Allah and to Allah. So there is an ability to accept the divine decree, even in a very difficult circumstance and at a young age. Although you may be aware of my view that I think sometimes children do accept things better than people my age. But nonetheless, this is related. It may also be because if one believes or acknowledges she had such a strong spiritual status and awareness of the complexity of the realm of creation, rather than someone like myself who grows up primarily in the physical and material aspect of creation and not necessarily perceiving, the interlink between the spiritual and the material. Maybe someone who has such an innate spiritual perception can easier accept and understand this sort of loss, even though it is difficult. And there's nothing in the example of Ahlul Bayt which says that one cannot grieve for loss. There is a good balance, in my view, between accepting that things are the will of Allah and accepting that this life is transient, while at the same time having a very human response of sadness and loss and processing it. But this is another angle which many people do model themselves. Of course, we do know that her entire family was very special and very committed to the prophetic mission. And this is one of the things that I think is most valuable to look at when talking about the family of the Holy Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt, as a group, as a family. And that is, it wasn't just that they were individuals working for the cause of Allah or working for the Prophet, and which many times is the case with us. It is entirely possible that someone is the only person in their family who has a dedication to Islam or a dedication to Allah or a dedication to service, and maybe the other people in the family, they just don't care or they actually oppose that because life is messy. However, when we look at her family, we do understand that this was a group effort, and because they were able to work in a united and harmonious manner and support each other in this mission, they were able to have a profound impact. I mean, even looking at her mother, Hazrat Khadija, we do know it's related that the Holy Prophet ﷺ said, Islam would not have survived without the sword of Ali and the wealth of Khadija. So these are some very, very, very practical commitments, very practical ways of serving the community through one's defensive capabilities and through one's financial capabilities. And the main idea is that all of the members of Ahlul Bayt were serving the Holy Prophet and contributing according to whatever capabilities they had. So, you know, even if you say they're all ma'soom, they're not necessarily going to have all the same strengths. For example, I haven't come across any narrations that Hazrat Khadija was a swordswoman. She may have been. There were swordswomen and female warriors at her time. But I haven't come across that was her strength. Fair enough. Not everyone is a warrior. Imam Ali was a warrior. So we have different strengths and capabilities, as do you. I use a general we, me, you. I am also not a warrior. You know, physical combat, not my strength. However, you know, I might do a bit better, for example, in the intellectual field. So everyone has their own inner strengths, capabilities, inclinations, and training, you know, things that they know how to do. There are many things I'm embarrassed to say that Hazrat Fatima knew how to do that I do not how to do, because I am a spoiled modern and I have lost sight of how to do a great many things that I'm sure my ancestors did know how to do. But the point is, the goal is not necessarily, in my view, to always copy everything they did, you know, literally. So, for example, I'm going to serve Allah by grinding grain into flour by hand, but rather to use these skills, opportunities, circumstances, and abilities we have at present, and because these will change throughout our lives usually, to use what we have sincerely for the service of Allah over the service of other people. And that, I believe, is the main idea to be modeled, but the exact applications of that differ a lot. And I do think it's nice, by the way, that in some of your programs, I do see that people are, you know, coming forward or brought forward to contribute in the areas of their specializations and skills, rather than a sort of one size fits all. Because today, as in the past, the world and the Islamic community does require specialization in many areas, not just everyone saying and doing the same thing. It is oftentimes said that Hazrat Fatima walked and looked very similar to the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and also spoke similar to him. Whether it was in terms of inflection or word choice, but also in terms of her sincerity and truthfulness. Well, okay, this is probably apparent within our community, for those who are members of the specific religious community here. But nonetheless, it is a good reminder that this is something also that we can model, a deep sense of sincerity and truth in speech. You know, some people, they do twist things around. They say, I'm not going to tell a lie, but they sort of neglect to tell you the whole truth. They forget to tell you something, and they kind of imply that it's not there to say at all. And then you find it out a month later and you are steaming mad at them because it feels dishonest, right? Right. So she was not like that. That's, you know, a very basic meaning of the term sadiqa, that she had this inherent honesty that when you talk to someone like that, you understand that there is a truth coming from their heart. Also, manners and knowledge, two things that were praised by Salama. Keeping in mind, again, Hazrat Fatima was quite young. Inshallah, our youth also have very beautiful manners and a very high level of knowledge, but it is something to aspire to for our entire lives. So, Hazrat Fatima was one of the Muslims who did perform the migration to Medina. So the establishment of the first public Muslim community and what would become the model for Islam in the social sphere for time to come. We know that this was a very busy time of her life. Again, whether it came to community issues or whether it came to personal issues. That on the one hand, this was when she got married to Imam Ali, peace be upon him, and had, alhamdulillah, a very beautiful, although not necessarily very long marriage, because she did pass away less than 10 years after that. We know that she gave birth to 4 surviving children. And, obviously that was a big responsibility. I'm not going to speculate on whether it was more difficult or less difficult to raise children back then. I mean, on the one hand, you didn't have all the stuff that's oftentimes available today, like disposable diapers. So, there would have been more to do by hand. But then again, I think there was less insecurity in the society about children, that they would just run around and play. And maybe there was a bit more of a, as they say, it takes a village to raise a child, as opposed to today when, many people are afraid to let their children outside, or you don't really feel the schools are raising your child very well and so forth. So I'm sure in some ways it was easier and in some ways it was harder, but nonetheless, still a lot of work. And again, herself being at a relatively young age with all of this responsibility, for most people, getting 4 kids at, one after another is a big life adjustment. On the other hand, there were still a lot of dynamic and big things happening in the Muslim community. This was really when the Muslims had to ramp up their physical defense, as in military defense. They were a community under attack. There were sieges. Her husband was spending time at the battlefront, as were others. So this is something that she had to go through. We do know that she was brought on the Mubahila, the diplomatic mission, one can say, when Allah commands the Holy Prophet ﷺ to bring his close family for the pray-off against the Christians. So you can tell people that the Holy Prophet fought people by having pray-offs. And one can argue that it is it does say something when the Holy Prophet brings a young woman to what is essentially a serious and potentially fraught with conflict diplomatic meeting. It could have gone differently. I mean, how many teenage girls do you see in meetings at the UN? I mean, occasionally they feature people, but you don't see them at the highest echelons of politics or in parliaments or diplomatic meetings. It doesn't happen. And yet this is what the Holy Prophet did with Hazrat Fatima, peace be upon her. And so it does show a very integral role in the community, both on a personal level and also on I guess you could say, an international level, or at least a diplomatic level. And we also know that this was a time when the Muslim community expanded tremendously, from this first handful of people who unfortunately were being mocked and attacked and oppressed for their faith in the early years, to the time of the farewell Hajj, where there were tens and tens of thousands of people who had adopted the Prophet's message and who had come and would be hearing his final words. So that is a big transition to live through in life, and we do see that throughout this time she is continually, not only living the Islamic and prophetic values herself, but modeling the service and contribution and concern for the community. And even just performing the hijrah in and of itself, is something that is honored in the Holy Quran. And it's a reminder to us as well, I advise myself first, that the Quran does not ever tell us to just sit there and be doormats. That if we are not able to flourish in our circumstances, especially when it comes to matters of faith and religion, Allah's earth is big. And yes, moving is very difficult. We all know some horrible situations these days of refugees who've been caught in camps in the snow, and there's a lot of moving is not always easy, but nonetheless, we are encouraged by the Quran to try and change our circumstances if we don't have any other choice, rather than just saying, well, this is it and I have to be patient and etc. And again, I'm definitely not saying that it's always easy, because unfortunately in this day and age, we know what goes on. I mean, it's really horrific, some of the human crises that are going on in this day and age. But sometimes this can be anything in our life. It's not always a physical move. It can be other personal adjustments we need to make our own hijras to move forward and inshallah have trust in Allah. We do know that the marriage of Hazrat Fatima And by the way, that's a manuscript picture on your screen of the marriage. I have to say that's not at all how I envision them looking at, but art is art. In any case, it's also interesting that Hazrat Fatima seems to be a bit bigger than Imam Ali in the picture. Anyway, nothing wrong with that. The female does not always need to be shorter. In any case, their marriage is oftentimes, and by this I mean the marriage ceremony, oftentimes put forward as a good example, as we know that they did not overinvest in luxury and pomp and circumstance, but instead they offered a simple but helpful ceremony. They were providing food, keeping in mind some of the Muslims in Medina were actually tended to be hungry, so this is actually a service. They did invite all the community. It is said that Allah blessed the food and multiplied it, and that it was a simple and modest but blessed event that was a very beautiful beginning to a very beautiful life together. For those of you who are watching, these are some of the narrations about the battles. And there's a manuscript picture of a battle. And she was definitely able to balance her daily life and the chores that she had to do with the higher mission and focus on serving Allah and serving the community, which is a very challenging thing. By the way, I have to say that personally, when I don't wish to compare myself to the Prophet at all, because obviously there's no comparison, but sometimes I think about it. Like, he did everything. Like he had his family life. I mean, wives, like one is enough. And he had wives and he had companions who wanted to talk to him and people who have questions and political issues. And he still managed to spend so much time in prayer. And he just had so much to do. And he did it all. And when I look at my life, I'm just overwhelmed when I have one or two things to do and I have a meltdown. So anyway, I do find it remarkable that the Ahlul Bayt were able to balance so many different responsibilities, through the blessings of Allah. But in any case, there is a lot, that reminds us about, both the, the very basic things she did in her life that any other normal woman would have been doing at the time, the housework and the baking, and childcare and so on and so forth. And also, sometimes in that sphere also using that as a place to give. So, for example, we know the stories of her giving away, any sort of ornament that she had or jewelry and so on and so forth, to those who were in need. It doesn't mean that we're not allowed to have these things, but it's just modeling selflessness and generosity. So these are oftentimes things that are very touching as well and remind us that there are many arenas that we can give in life. It can be from within the home, it can be on the battlefield or the political field, and so on and so forth. We know also that Hazrat Fatima was a spiritual pillar of the community. Sometimes I feel like in this day and age, we undervalue this, because modernity is very material. We focus primarily on things like the stock market and bank accounts and factory production and things we can touch and say this is tangible. And Islam definitely has a zone or a place for the tangible, but it also has a place for the spiritual. And just as it is valuable to be baking your bread and grinding your grain, it is also valuable to be a spiritual pillar of the community. That Hazrat Fatima was always there, praying for other people, seeking Allah's blessings for other people. And this is something that we can model fairly easily, inshallah. You don't have to do it, quite as fully or intensely. One can do it even for a few minutes. But nonetheless, it is also a valuable service, simply to offer prayer for humanity or creation in general, if you like. You can pray for animals as well, or whatever you like. And that this is also a valuable contribution that should not be ignored. if you look at really a lot of pre-modern societies, like in Europe, for example, you think about what was the role of a monastery or a nunnery. I mean, they had many social roles, but it seems to be there was an appreciation that there is a value and merit to having people who are also offering a spiritual service to the human beings around them. Whereas nowadays, when people look at that, they think, well, what's the point? They're not making anything. They're not producing anything, even though they do sometimes produce things. But the point is their primary role is not academic or productional. And yet, obviously, she is producing the normal things that women would produce in their households, but also providing a spiritual service, which, inshallah, we can model as well. And we do know that in our traditions, Hazrat Fatima is mentioned as a woman who was muhaddatha, a woman whom the angels spoke with. One of many in the Quran, or one of some in the Quran at least. She's not the only one. Virgin Mary is one as well. Both in terms of her, during the middle of her married life, if you will, her domestic years, and also towards the end of her life. It is related that certain things were dictated to her from the angels. So she has an interesting role as a locus of angelic contact. That's kind of cool. I think we should definitely add it. We don't have to always, make everything very 100% practical. And because of this, and because of all of this, there are many things that are said about her, which you have all heard. The inhabitants of the heavens perceive her brilliance in the manner that the inhabitants of the earth perceive the brilliance of the stars. MashaAllah. That's very beautiful. May Allah grant all of us light. God is angry when Fatima is angry and pleased when she is pleased. Can we model this? Maybe? Yes? No? I will leave that to you. Can we model that? God is angry when Fatima is angry and pleased when she is pleased. The first to enter paradise will be Fatima. Her status in the community is like the status of Maryam among the Bani Israel. And then we come to her final days. And of course, again, this is someone who had a relatively brief but very full life. Did many things that other people do not in 80 or 90 years. And we do know this was a very challenging time, and that this was a time when she took a very strong stance regarding what was going on in the Muslim community, regarding the caliphate, regarding the direction of the Muslim community. We know this is the time of her famous sermon related from her about Fadak. And again, if you think about it, she didn't waver when it came to time to give the sermon of Fadak. She didn't stop and think that, am I good enough to give a speech? What am I going to say? Maybe I shouldn't do this. And all the things that we do, right? She just got up and did it because it was what needed to be done. And although her speech was very powerful, Imam Ali gave many powerful speeches, I do think, I'm not biased here, I do think there is a special force that a powerful and very truthful and very, very severe speech like this has when it comes from the mouth of a young woman, a young mother. I mean, she must have been quite thin because they're always fasting and giving away their food and sometimes suffering hunger. So she's not like a sword woman or a spear woman coming to fight the guys. She's frail and youthful, and a lot of people who were involved in the issue of the succession were older. Again, they were men who fought each other. And you get another man up there, and they're going to be rough, they're going to be aggressive, they're going to put someone in ropes. A woman comes up like that, a young woman, and all of a sudden it's kind of like sit down and shut up time. You get this sort of embarrassment that overcomes you when you hear this woman basically telling you off, if you will. So in any case, this was a powerful speech that was remembered and had a very strong effect. This may be something that we model in our lives as well, speaking up when it is necessary and when large matters are at stake, even if it is something that could put us in danger or does require a certain bit of bravery. And of course, we do know that the last years of her life were also, or last days of her life were quite sad, both with respect to what was happening with the community and her husband and the loss of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And she did pass on. A reminder that her role does not end there. There are a number of narrations about her having a very prominent role on the day of resurrection. If you wish to read this whole narration, you can rewatch this program and pause this screen, and then you can look at it. But that, she will be very heavily involved in things there. But beyond that, I think it's worth acknowledging that she also has a role in her remembrance. That is to say, she had certain roles in her life, that she did historically or practically. But also she plays a role, first of all, as a pillar of unity in the Muslim community. Muslims all over the world respect and revere her and look to her for inspiration. I mean, you have the Fatima dynasty, for example. It's named after her. Al-Azhar, for example. A lot of countries, for example, have marriage customs relating to Hazrat Fatima. Someone told me once there's a herbal medicine in Malaysia named after her, which is said to help both men and women flourish, so to speak, especially when they're married, and have all sorts of good and beneficial effects. Many people use the hand of Fatima as a symbol or something they like to keep around. So she is someone who's continues to be remembered and inspirational in a great many ways, whether it's, as a daughter, as a wife, as a companion, as an activist, modeling struggles for social justice, for truth, for what is right, or for defense, bravery, fearlessness, sincerity, spirituality, many things. So just as she did things in her life, there is a certain role in terms of being remembered. So with that, I will now open up the discussion. If you have, first of all, any questions or comments, or comments, as we say, comments phrased as questions, feel free to share them. And also, please do give some thoughts on these questions. Is Hazrat Fatima modelable, if you will, or is she just so lofty that we can't even try? Or is perfection a good model to strive for? And can she be a role model for people who are in different life circumstances? So I look forward to hearing all of your views.
Thank you so much, Amina, for your talk. But just wait a couple of seconds as it moves along. 1 second, sorry. Okay, thank you very much for that talk. Very interesting, very powerful. Covered a lot of area, a wide variety of topics, and about Bi Fatima alayhi salam. Just before we start, just remind everyone, you feel free, please, to ask questions directly on Zoom. You can ask it, or if you'd like to ask directly, so please feel free to come on Zoom if you'd like. Or alternatively, please send your messages and your email, your questions to us via on the YouTube chat, or via Facebook chat, or also alternatively directly to me. So firstly, let's start with the questions which have already come in, and then we can move on to others. All right. Firstly, this question from Dr. Nizar. The Sunni source of her birthday, of Bibi Fatima alayhi salam's birthday in 605 sounds more plausible for the following reasons. Her father was 35 rather than 45. Her mother was 50 rather than 60. Fatima gets married at age 19 rather than 12 or 14, and Fatima dies at age 28 rather than age 19 or 21. Remembering that she gave birth to 4 children, what's your view on that?
Those are some points. I mean, obviously, there are 2 sustained different views historically, and so not everyone is ever going to agree 100%. Just my overall thoughts on that in general is these things, as we know, do tend to become polemical issues, and sometimes it's worthwhile to challenge the underlying assumptions. That is to say, in addition to perhaps different narrations or sources, some Shi'is will argue that it, would have been a merit for her to be younger, or a greater tragedy for her to be killed while younger. But in reality, it doesn't make her a lesser or better person, which date she was born in. Birth and death are in the hands of Allah, even if humans are used as mediums sometimes for that. I think regarding the childbirth argument, I think it is reasonable for someone in that age bracket and life situation to give birth to 4 children in succession. It's not uncommon for young women to do that, especially back in the day before they had all the medical stuff going on, and where women were encouraged to have a lot of children, given that they tended to lose them. So I don't think that's unreasonable. I think the main area where this might be relevant today is with the very hot topic of child marriage, in that some people, for example, will take the earlier birth date and say, look at the Holy Prophet. He did not allow his daughter to get married when she was so young. He waited until she was a bit older, and therefore Muslims should follow this. Whereas someone who takes the later birth date will actually say that actually she got married, at a much younger age. I mean, of course, keeping in mind, if she had gotten married at the younger age, this would have been quite normal for their society and not unusual. But nonetheless, this is one area that it does have a relevance in the contemporary issues of the Islamic world. But God knows best. None of us were there.
Thank you very much. A couple of other people have joined Zoom, so if you do want to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and I can include you. Otherwise, I'll go to the next question, which is, okay, no one's asked. Ask the next question. What is your view on the controversy about Bibi Fatima alayhi salam and the door?
Oh, wow. Let's see here. Who has tomatoes to throw at me? I mean, it's recorded. It's found in books. History is not an absolute science. It's very rare that you can really 100% prove something historically unless it has some sort of material evidence, like the Roman Forum. I mean, what you can say is that it's in books, and there is a reasonable argument that it happened, while at the same time, generally speaking, in particular, many of the Ahl Sunnah do not accept it historically. I think for obvious reasons, because obviously it would call into question certain personalities revered in that particular tradition. And I don't really think we're going to seriously get any full agreement among Muslims on the topic in the near future, simply because it does involve perceptions of historical figures that are so foundational to both Sunnism and Shiism. And I think it's nice if we can kind of de-escalate some of the issues around it, such as attacking Shi'is who don't accept it. I mean, it's in a history book. You can accept it, or you can. It is in multiple sources. You can accept it or not accept it, but its presence in sources obviously doesn't make it the only view. I mean, I personally accept it, but I'm also biased because I'm Shi'i. So maybe I would think differently if I were Sunni. Yeah, so basically, just in general, I do feel that it's nice to be able to discuss these things without attacking each other, in the same way as if we have a questionable hadith or a hadith that people disagree upon. I mean, we can acknowledge there are differences of opinion and just try to move forward with doing our best attempts to find what is true.
Thank you very much. The next question from YouTube. Does Sheikh Amina think that had she not this cosmological significance, alayhi salam, where Nubuwa and Wilaya met, she would still be venerated in Islamic history? If so, do you have any theories as to how?
Do you mean she would be venerated if she had it, or if she did not have it?
I'm not sure. I'm just reading out what it says on that. I guess
that one's mine. If I may interject.
Oh, please.
Assalamu alaikum, dear Sheikh. So yeah, my question is, given what you said about her charity and all the works that she did, do you think that these would have, given this kind of material but celestial history or histories that you've presented, had Sayyidah Fatima not been that locus of, say, wilaya and nubuwwah meeting, do you think her role as a woman central to the Islamic narrative being remembered for other things, say her works, say, rather than her place celestially, shall we say?
Well, certainly you know that Dr. Shariati in Fatima is Fatima does celebrate her more pragmatic and social, not pragmatic, but her contributions as a social activist in the Islamic movement, more so than the, one can say, cosmological aspects. And certainly, I mean, there's any number of Sunni Muslims, especially in the modern Islamic movements, who do focus on her practical conduct and behavior as one of the companions and one of the members of the early Muslim community, without necessarily looking at more spiritual issues that you might find among like Sufis and so forth. So I would say that is definitely done in a lot of places. So I think it is done in practice. But thank you for bringing up a very interesting point.
Thank you very much. Another question: how would you reconcile two different situations? One, Bibi Fatima alayhi salam after the death of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in terms of how she was open and in the public about Fadl, and secondly, where there are narrations which encourage her to remain at home. How do you reconcile those two apparently contradictory situations or hadith?
I do not believe the narration which says that the best thing for a woman is not to be seen by a man is authentic or authentically related. I don't think it's authentic really by any scholar in terms of isnad, but I don't believe it's something she actually said. If she did say it, as a wise scholar mentioned, she didn't necessarily live according to that premise anyway. So the conduct clashes with the narration. And also I want to point out that my perception of the community in Medina, keeping in mind we're not there, so we can never 100% get an idea of how it was, but one gets a sense that really they were all physically quite close to each other in the community. Everyone was always knowing each other's business. It was very hard to have any privacy. Even to use the restroom, they didn't have like indoor plumbing. You had to go outside and walk to the bathroom, and then Omar, for example, didn't like the women walking to the bathroom at night because men might look at them or chat with them or whatever. So, you've got this tension on the one hand where there is this, mention of hijab. And then on the other hand, you have the reality that it's just such an interconnected society. I mean, if you look at the Prophet's house and Imam Ali's house, it's right at the central mosque. So I do feel that some of these reports regarding hijab in general are in some ways a coping mechanism to try to get some privacy in a society which really didn't have very much. I mean, even when you look at some of the narrations about the hijab of the wives of the Prophet, and by that I don't mean the clothing, but segregation or separation, they're coming in circumstances where like, Imam Ali mentions sleeping under the same blanket as one of the wives of the Prophet before that verse, or Omar is eating with one of them and his hand touches the wife's hand. I mean, it's not like how I think we envision it today, where we already have a baseline that we've got a segregated mosque or men and women in a separate room, and we have this, a stronger culture of distance. It seems like, basically there probably needed to be certain coping mechanisms and separations to deal with a society where there was sometimes a bit too much closeness.
Thank you very much. This is a difficult question. What do you think are the three top qualities of Bibi Fatima alayhi salam that we should learn from today?
Well, I honestly think that every human being has an inner nature that they intrinsically tend to value certain traits more, that probably relate to what we're supposed to be doing in life. So the things that I personally might consider to be inspirational or valuable are not necessarily going to be the things that someone else is going to be, drawn by. So, for example, a friend of mine once suggested that if I really tried, I might have an inner social activist inside myself. I do respect social activism, but I don't think it's my strength in the way that it's some of other people's strengths. So my viewpoint would only be my viewpoint, and others will have their things. But I think in general, probably sincerity is a big one. You can't go wrong with sincerity, and working for a greater cause, and also maybe patience with the human condition. That's a tough one. I mean, having patience with the human condition is a tough one.
Thank you. And I think there's one question on YouTube. Just want to check. Okay, no, it's just a comment. Okay, thank you very much. I think we have covered quite a few questions there, and thank you so much for coming and talking to us and speaking and sharing your thoughts. It was really interesting, and inshallah we'll get a chance to benefit from you again in the future, inshallah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here virtually.
Thank you so much. And we're now going to end with Ziyarat, which will be on YouTube, but it will not come here in Zoom. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, too. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا محمد بن عبد الله ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى ابن عمك أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب وصي رسول رب العالمين السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى بضعتك الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى زوجتك الوفية الغراء خديجة الكبرى أم المؤمنين السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى ولديك الإمامين الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة السلام عليك يا رسول الله وعلى أئمة المسلمين من ذرية ولدك الحسين علي السجاد ومحمد الباقر وجعفر الصادق وموسى الكاظم وعلي الرضا ومحمد الجواد وعلي الهادي والحسن العسكري والحجة بن الحسن المهدي السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك وجعلنا الله من أنصارك وأعوانك والمستشهدين بين يديك السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.